Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing remarkably well. And make sure you get yourself a lovely revitalising drink, because I've got a very revitalising story for you tonight that you're going to thoroughly enjoy. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I stare out vacantly at the window in the doctor's surgery. It overlooks a yard of pristine green manicured turf, a scattering of statuesque mature-looking oak trees, their leaves ablaze in a golden confetti. Some are floating up in the air, like celestial butterflies, as a soft breeze is blowing. There's a long ribbon of grey asphalt that reflects the shadows of the oak trees on its surface. And then behind the pavement, the white walls and wrought-iron gates fringe the outer perimeters of a prepossessing whitewashed school building. I notice bountiful cars emerging as if by magic, rolling down the road in what looks like a funeral procession, within minutes of each other. Parents coming to pick their kids up from school, many of them clustered together like trees in the woodgrove, as they await the arrival of their children. I glance up at the surgery clock. It reads 2:10. I can see a plethora of kids descending out of the school gates very suddenly, like a flock of excitable geese. For a moment, I have fleeting, nostalgic, rather wistful memories of my own school days, and the ice cream van that was strategically parked outside the school every time we'd finished for the day. I remember I was in a lift club with 4 other children, roughly about my own age. Mrs. Gosnell was the only mother that would take all 4 of us towards the ice cream van to choose for ourselves an ice cream. All 4 of us kids would choose blueberry popsicles. Oh my word, I can still taste them today on my tongue. The best popsicles I have ever tasted. Sweet, decadent, flavourful, blissfully pleasurable to eat, richly purple in colour. I don't think they make them now. We would always return home with purple stains all over our mouths, and bespeckled over our uniforms, looking as if we'd been entertaining a blueberry bush for the last few hours. My mother would say to me, "Why on earth do you always return home with blueberry stains all over your clothes after Mrs. Gosnell has picked you up?" Mrs. Gosnell had sworn us to secrecy, not to tell the other parents about our blueberry splurges, for fear of reprisals from strict, prudent mothers who had evacuated sugar from their children's diets. I would crinkle my brows and say, "I can't think what you're talking about, Mum." I realise I've been gawking out of the window of the surgery for far too long. The middle-aged receptionist, whose golden-brown crinkled skin looks more like leather, possibly from overindulging in the sun far too much in her youthful days, is sitting on a swivel chair behind the reception desk and giving me disapproving looks, as if she thinks it's inappropriate for me to be staring out of the window like that. So I return to the upholstered chair in the waiting lounge and lift up a glossy magazine, skimming through it so vaguely, pretending to read it, when in reality my mind is 1,000 miles away. I can see the man sitting next to me is giving me odd looks. He surreptitiously notices what I appear to be reading. I glance down at the page of the magazine that reads, "Are you secretly looking to change your sex?" I flush with embarrassment, slam the magazine shut. The man is physically smirking. I almost want to shout out, "Actually, I'm very happy being female, thank you very much, and no, I'm not secretly fantasizing about becoming a man any time soon." There's a note on the wall of the doctor's waiting room that reads, "No cell phones can be used in the waiting room." My heart is fluttering in my chest violently. It's taken me all my courage to come here today. For a start, I avoid doctors' offices like the plague. I hate the way they smell of surgical spirits and give off that menacing vibe that I loathe, that always makes you think of sickness, disease, and even death, dare I say it. Still, I know coming here today is a prerequisite for me. I have come to the conclusion that I really need help. I'm not capable of actually fixing myself. I'm like a quintessential broken vase that is shattered into thousands of shards. It seems highly doubtful that I can ever put myself together again. Highly improbable, that is, that I can be delivered from the dark hole I find myself slipping into, deeper and deeper and deeper. Indeed, if I sink any lower, I might just bury myself alive, and I can't have that. I'm tired of being so crippled and debilitated by my own emotional pain. It has literally sucked me dry over the last 6 months. It was then that I ascertained I had almost certainly lost my will to live. I knew then I had a problem. I wasn't suicidal, but life had become like a black page to me, upon which all the colour had been extinguished and recklessly obliterated. I would stare out at the windows vacantly, day after day. How I wanted to disappear, more than anything else in this world, like the white smoke billowing from a chimney, or like a dandelion seed being caught up in the blustering gusts of wind and blown far, far, far away. I was desirous never to have to feel the gravity of my pain ever again, as its laborious weight was all-consuming. I cannot tell you how many people have said to me, "Never you mind. God will never give you more than you can bear." Are you kidding me? I don't believe a word of that. I'm sorry, but the cumbersome burden of my grief has been insurmountable. I have felt as if I've been buried alive under large concrete slabs for months and months on end, barely being able to breathe, as if the crushing pressure of the world has pressed down on me so hard. All that is left of me is my crisp outer shell. My innards have been battered into beetle juice. There are 4 other people in the doctor's waiting room besides me. I find myself studying them with a curious interest, for my personal amusement and entertainment, as observing people can be very interesting. I'm taking in every detail of their appearance, including the middle-aged man who was giving me funnier looks earlier. Now it seems he's heavily caught up in an article he's reading, all about aphids found on roses and how you eliminate them. He seems very engaged in the article. He must be a keen gardener, I decide. I'm wondering about these people's lives, what they're doing at the doctor's office. Have they found a suspicious lump that needs to be investigated? Or are they worried that their urine has turned dark? Or have they been feeling very sluggish of late and sense something's not right? Or maybe they are punctiliously prudent and are here for their routine checkup to ensure that their heart is still firing efficiently on all its cylinders and their liver is still secreting bile, regardless of their boozy alcoholic indulgent binges. There's something about a doctor's reassuring words that can almost certainly wipe away the angst, faster than the rain being wiped away by very efficient windscreen wipers on our trucks. An elderly man with a shiny bald head and distinctive black walrus moustache that is so perfect it almost looks fake, as if he stuck it on before visiting the doctor's office. I decide it's got to be real. He appears to be reading a magazine article, but whether he is or not is open for debate. He could be secretly flapping about his appointment with the doctor like me, and not reading a single thing. I notice he's tugging at invisible hair on his head, possibly a natural reflex from when he did once actually have hair, like the phantom leg pain you hear that amputees claim to feel when they're missing a leg. Could this man be feeling the lost hair he once possessed, that is now vacant on his head? I find myself fascinated by this bizarre thought. There's a young woman possibly 5 years younger than me. I think she's possibly 25. She looks as nervous as I feel, like a fish out of water. I'm sure she'd rather be anywhere else in the entire world than in this doctor's office, and she's in good company there. I feel exactly the same. She's tapping her feet awkwardly on the ground and tugging at the French braid that hangs over her shoulder like a tail. She has a pretty symmetrical face with a perfect turned-up little nose, and her smouldering hazel eyes look crestfallen and overcast, almost as sorrowful as a grey sky. I feel a strange affinity with her, as if she's been privy to glancing through the peephole of the desolate wilderness of my own life, as if she too has also tasted that rock-bottom place that I can identify with, that oppressive melancholia that has hijacked my own life. An older woman with salt and pepper colour hair, done in a pixie cut, looks up with annoyance from her magazine, as she watches the young lady tapping her feet on the floor. Her lips move, but thankfully nothing comes out. I'm sure she wants to tell the young woman to stop shaking her foot, but she restrains her wagging tongue, as if correcting a misbehaving pooch. All of a sudden, a large spider, the size of a small hand, dashes across the designer blue and gold carpet in the hospital room, and the young girl stands up on seeing the spider, her hazel eyes filled with terror. "Spider! Spider! Oh my God! A spider!" She faints, falling back on the carpet. I dash quickly over to her, lifting the young girl up from the floor, while the 3 other people in the waiting room just watch me in bemusement, failing to offer any help. Talk about being insensitive. "Are you all right?" I ask the young lady, who seems to come around from her oblivion, looking at me earnestly as she rises to her feet awkwardly, her skinny legs almost crumbling under the weight of lifting herself off the ground. "Has it gone? Has it gone?" she asks in a trembling voice, her eyes skimming the carpet with an apprehensive trepidation. "Has it gone?" she says again. "You mean the spider?" She nods. I'm terrified of spiders. I'm so frightened of them." "Yes, it's gone," I say. I pull out my bottle of Coca-Cola from my purse and hand it to her. "Drink this," I say. "The sugar should help you feel better. It'll calm you down." "Thanks," she says gratefully, sipping down the sugary drink. "My name is Francesca," she says. "And yours?" "I'm Eloise," I say. "Thanks for helping me, Eloise. I'm terrified of so many things, spiders being one of the many." "I think there's a name for it," I say. "Arachnophobia. So you're not alone in your fear. They've actually got a name for your condition. There are thousands of people out there in the world that share the same aversion. You shouldn't worry about it. But you don't understand. I am alone in my fear," she explains, looking at me with her wide, frightened eyes. "You see, it's not just spiders I'm afraid of. Sometimes I'm afraid of my own breath. That's actually why I'm here at the doctor's surgery today. I have to nip my fear in the bud. I can't go on living like this anymore. It's completely overtaking my life. Sometimes I'm even afraid to leave my own house." "I understand where you're coming from," I say compassionately. "I don't suffer from your fear, but I have a front row seat to helplessness, you could say." "Helplessness," says a young woman. "Oh, I identify with that. I'm so well acquainted with that feeling. I feel it every day of my life." The receptionist, who's been absent from the desk when the young woman had fainted, has been blindly oblivious to what had just transpired. She re-emerges from her hibernation, wherever that was. Her brown, assertive eyes remind me of a raven's. They hover over me, and she pipes, "Eloise Bellington, Mr. Warwick will see you now." She indicates for me to follow her. Before long, I'm seated in Mr. Warwick's office. I've never met him before. I don't actually know what to expect. I glance over at the office to see whether there's anything that I can learn about him before I meet him. I notice he's terribly neat, which is a very good sign. He's obviously punctilious. I hope he's like that with all his patients, as it gives me a reassuring feeling that I'm in good hands. Everything in the office is austere, though. There are no frills, no feminine influences whatsoever. It's a pretty mediocre pedestrian office that is attempting to look sophisticated and not quite succeeding. There's a large flat-screen computer situated central stage on the gleaming oakwood desk that smells strongly of furniture polish and is elegantly lined with a green leather insert framed by a lacy gold print. There's a couple of diaries on his desk and some plastic display models of hearts, kidneys and brains. Even the pictures on the wall beyond his gilded certificates are pictures of the human skeleton. When Mr. Warwick enters the room, I'm surprised by his size. The man is a midget. I didn't expect that. He's about 3.5 foot tall, but he's got a great sense of humour. "Don't look so shocked," he says. "I may be a midget, but I'm one hell of a good doctor. I assure you of that. Don't be deceived by my looks." My lips twitch with amusement. I find all my inhibitions are thrown to the wayside. I realise there's no way that this doctor is going to judge me for my issues, as I imagine, based on his small size, the poor man has been judged all his life for that. There's something disarming and reassuring about being in the presence of a kindred spirit. I watch the small man climbing on top of his chair. He reaches towards his computer in a standing position and taps into it with his tiny hand. "Ah, I've got your details here. Here we go. You're Eloise Bellington, isn't that right?" "That's right," I say. "You were last here over 2.5 years ago, when you were referred to Mr. Gatenbury, who's your gynecologist, I take it. I believe he guided you through your whole pregnancy, and of course the delivery of your baby boy. Is that right? That's right, I say. The doctor looks at me with very warm eyes. His head is a lot bigger than his torso, but he's got such a gentle face. So what do I owe this pleasure? How can I be of help to you, young lady? I shrug my shoulders. I'm not doing very well, Dr. Warwick. I say, well, emotionally, that is. I'm afraid I lost my little baby boy, Christopher Thomas, to a cot death about when he was 6 months old. It was a while back. Let's just say my life's never been the same again, and I'm not coping. Sometimes it's a struggle to even get out of bed. I realise that the bleak, desolate feeling is alien to who I once was. I barely recognise myself in the mirror these days. I don't know who that person is that's staring back at me. I'm just not the same as I was. It's like I wouldn't even care if I was dead. I'm not suicidal, don't think that for a moment, but let's just say the thought of dying almost seems like a welcome release. There was a time in my life I was actually terrified of death. I don't identify with that anymore. It used to haunt my darkest nightmares, but now I welcome the thought of dying. I see it as an escape, a release from the darkness that has clung to my life over the last few months. I know, Dr. Warwick, it's not normal to feel this way. That's not good, says Mr. Warwick. I don't like the sound of that at all. First of all, I want to express my condolences to the loss of your baby boy. SIDS is a dreadful way to lose a child. It's very hard on the parents. Despite modern advancements in medicine, we have no explanation as to why young babies can suddenly just die inexplicably like this. I assure you, your son's death was not your fault, and I hope you haven't been blaming yourself for his death, because that happens an awful lot. Self-recrimination, condemnation, is often experienced by parents after a grievous event like this, and let's just say it's not good for your health. Guilt of any kind can have devastating repercussions. The trouble is we don't have pills for guilt. Otherwise, I would be dishing them out by the cartload, as people can be more unkind to themselves than anybody else. Oh, but I do feel very guilty, Doctor. It's all my fault. I should never have allowed my boyfriend's mother to look after my child. She was the one who found him dead. Look, I understand it's easy to hold yourself accountable for what happened, but I assure you, no one is to blame for a SIDS death. It happens. Blaming yourself is going to mean you punish yourself. You believe you're not worthy of having a happy life. Inadvertently, you're whipping yourself for your son's demise, and he would hate you to be doing that. I'm sure of that. You might be right about that, but I do hate myself. I tell you what I'm going to do, says Mr. Warwick. I'm going to perform some blood tests on you, to check that there is nothing else going on in your body. It's always important to check the bloods. I'm going to check your vitals, your heart, your blood pressure, and stuff like that. Also, I hope you're taking vitamin B and vitamin D, very essential nutrients to be taking when you're stressed. Once we know where we are after the blood work comes back, and I am reassured by your physical well-being, I will put you on some antidepressant medication. I will also be sending you to a trauma counsellor. I must insist you see a counsellor to help you work through your issues. In the meantime, I'm going to give you some tranquilizers as a stopgap, but I will tell you unequivocally that you are suffering from depression. My guess is your serotonin levels are depleted in your brain, which is your feel-good chemical in the brain. The antidepressants will be able to fix all your issues in that regard. They're highly effective. In no time at all, we'll be having you feeling as right as rain, a whole lot better. I thank the doctor. As I was leaving the offices, the receptionist gives me a piece of paper. The young lady who went to see Dr. Harper asked me to give you this. I open the note. It reads, "You look like you could do with a friend like me. I could almost certainly do with a friend like you. I sense we're both on exactly the same page. Helplessness is my middle name. It would be good to get to know you. Fancy a coffee sometime? Francesca Douglas. P.S. Call me." I smile at the note, tucking it into my purse. Maybe she's right. Maybe we are on exactly the same page. It would be nice to have an empathetic friend. Goodness gracious, I could do with one. No one understands what I've been going through. And even my ex-boyfriend did not share the same measure of grief when he learnt our son had died. When I fortuitously fell pregnant, he had been devastated, actively encouraging me to have an abortion, without considering my feelings in regards to the matter. I was offended and insulted, so I unhesitantly ended our relationship. I never regretted that decision. I'll never forget his bewildered expression when I told him I was pregnant. He looked as if I had told him he had 6 months left to live, and was now living on borrowed time.
"But I can't have a baby. I have my whole life ahead of me. I'm not ready to be a father."
Notice how everything was I, how it would ultimately affect him. There was no us in the equation. My boyfriend was only concerned about how his life would personally be impacted by having to deal with a baby. Suffice to say, his new girlfriend is now pregnant. They're expecting their baby in June. He actually is quite pleased about that, so he has changed. By all accounts, he only visited our baby a handful of times after he was born, showing about as much interest in his son as a crocodile might show towards a garden salad. So he really wasn't interested in baby Christopher at the time. I perceived that he seemed almost relieved about our baby's demise, as if a load had been lifted off his shoulders, when his mother informed him about what had transpired that inauspicious night, when my whole world was turned upside down, and I knew I would never ever be the same again. I still remember that night, and the following morning, when heartbreak and disillusionment became my 2 new best friends, that hung around me perpetually day after day, with a profound loyalty. That day I recall like no other day in my entire life. I think trauma leaves an indelible imprint on the fabric of our lives that cannot become faded or washed away. It's seared in the very foundations of our souls with a permanent ink. My girlfriends had been pestering me to have a night out in town. "Go on, you deserve it," they'd insisted. "You need a break from being a mother, for goodness sake. Get your ex-boyfriend's mother to take care of baby Christopher. You know she's been begging you often enough. She loves her grandchild and will take good care of him for you. You need to delegate childcare responsibility with other people who are willing to help, or you'll have a mental breakdown. You can't do it all yourself as a single mother." I had been devoting every single minute of my time to watching over my beloved baby. So much had changed in my life since Christopher's serendipitous birth. I no longer looked at my reflection in the mirror, fussed over my nails and hair, or worried about anything else other than my tiny baby that was completely dependent upon me. At the time, it seemed like the 2 of us were against the world. I was sharing an apartment with a friend of mine in Atlanta, in the neighborhood of Peachtree Park, in the Buckhead area, which is an upscale suburb in Atlanta, located north of Midtown and south of Brookhaven, and is often known as the village in the city, as it encompasses that all-relaxing vibe. I was writing articles as a single mother for a company to procure a much-needed income, even though I admit it was piddling pay, but it was better than nothing. My friend Diane, who shared my apartment with me, was brilliant in helping out with Christopher, and she loved him too, which helped. I knew my friends were absolutely right. I needed a night out, so I dutifully dropped my baby off at my ex-boyfriend's mother's house. Whitney Hendrick was the most wonderful woman. She was so devoted to her grandchild, little Christopher. She had been devastated when I'd broken it off with her son, but was empathetic to my plight. "I know my son can be so self-centered," she'd told me, "but I want you to know I'm delighted to be a grandmother, and I'd like to help in any way I can in raising my grandson." I remember when I dropped off little Christopher at Whitney's house, her face had become so animated, as she cradled my little boy in her arms, rocking him backwards and forwards, looking at me with bright, besotted, adoring eyes. "Yes, little Christopher, you're going to spend an evening with Granny. Yes, you're going to spend a lovely evening with your Granny, while your mother is out painting the town red. You and I, we're going to have a fabulous time together, are we not? I'll read you some lovely stories." She looks up at me reassuringly. "Don't you worry your cotton socks, dear. I'll take good care of little Christopher. You can pick him up tomorrow morning when you're ready. I'll take very good care of him. By Jove, you look exhausted, young lady. You need a night on the town like your friends say. You really deserve it. You're a phenomenal mother. You really are. Are you going to say goodbye, little Christopher, to your mummy? Say goodbye. Look, he's waving at you. After leaving my baby boy in Whitney's charge, I felt as if I'd been away from him for hours. I knew I needed to let it go, spend a night in town with my friends. And while it's good to let my hair down and relax, I couldn't stop thinking about my baby the entire night. Is he all right? Does he need me? Those provocative thoughts haunted me tirelessly. Despite the drunken laughs from my friends and all the rich spoils of barbecue ribs, porterhouse steaks and crispy onion rings, my thoughts remained very much fixed on my son. They were far away from the festive ambience of that evening out, an evening that I would always live to regret. The following morning I woke up at the crack of dawn, feeling the solitude of the apartment, without my son, especially as my friend wasn't in. I needed to get my baby now. Something was missing, and it was its happy, gurgling chuckles, his cute little smiling face staring up at me. I needed Christopher, and I needed him now. I don't remember the short trip to Whitney's house, only minutes away from where I lived, but I couldn't get there fast enough. It's faded in my memory, rather like the yard scraps you discard, as they have absolutely no use to you. I do vividly recall my first impressions when I arrived at Whitney's house that day, when I parked my car in her driveway, outside the double doors of her garage. The pretty morning sunlight filtered over the white walls in prisms of ethereal light, while the oak tree to the rear of the property seemed to swagger in the gentle breeze, as if the tree itself was in a mournful, lugubrious repose. It was almost as if this stoic house was basking in a rueful melancholia, almost as if it was mirroring the hangdog woeful emotions of its current occupant, which in this case was Whitney herself. Then if that wasn't bad enough, Whitney comes to the door. She stands silently in the doorway. She's wearing a pink tracksuit. Her eyes look like desolate sunken hollows, circled by dark rings. Her mouth is turned upside down, and the vacant forlorn look she gives me wears a harrowing knowledge that I can read as clearly as a book. Something has happened to Christopher. The doleful revelation slashes into my heart like a knife gliding through butter. For a moment I freeze. Then my reactions rev up like a car engine, as if you're pressing the remote control of your television, turning it on to fast forward, or watching one of those age-old silent movies at a crazy, insane speed. My adrenaline spikes. My heart thumps. My mind is screaming, "No! Please! No! No! No!" I dash quickly past Whitney, pushing her to one side so that I can get through to my son. The woman reeks of hard alcohol. The smell of whiskey permeates my nostrils with a violent, uninviting intrusiveness that severs the air with a bodeful, oppressive ambience, where beneath its pungent notes I smell, feel, and taste disaster, like a hound dog on the trail of a fox. Whitney doesn't drink as a habit, only when she's anxious or stressed out. Something's seriously wrong. I rush towards the little nursery that Whitney made up for her grandson. I dash over to the cot. I sigh with relief. My son looks so peaceful lying there, with a comfortable blue cotton blanket cradling his body. But as I look closer, I realise he's not moving. I scream and scream when I hold my precious baby in my arms. I find his body is as cold as ice. He's not moving. "Call the ambulance!" I scream. "Someone help! Help! My child's not breathing! My baby's not breathing! Help!" Whitney has entered the bedroom. She stares blankly at me. "I found him like that this morning," she says. "There's no point in calling the emergency services. He's been dead for ages. I'm sorry. I did call the coroner's office. They'll be here shortly to do an autopsy on little Christopher. I've been drinking whiskey all morning. I can't handle this. Your son was on my watch. I let you down. I let him down. This is my grandson we're talking about. He's dead." I begin to sob and sob. Whitney begins to weep. We cling to each other for dear life so tightly, as if we never want to let go of each other. Before long, I was knocking back the whiskey to medicate my despair. I can't stand the stuff, but it did help calm the edge of my pain. Of course, the coroner informed us that Christopher had died of sudden infant death syndrome, but you never get over that. How can you? Losing a 6-month-old baby is not something you easily get over. I painfully brushed those tormenting memories aside. I glanced down at the telephone number in my hands from Francesca, who clearly had issues with anxiety, fear, and possibly even depression. The doctor said they're all connected and require antidepressant medication. I knew I could do with a friend who could commiserate with my depression. None of my other friends had the slightest clue how raw my emotions were. But Francesca, she might just understand. Against all odds, me and Francesca became the best of friends. I'd never expected that. But the saying misery loves company is definitely true. It would seem the two of us related to each other's issues. We could open up to each other, share our darkest thoughts and greatest misgivings, and that felt good. I couldn't talk to my friends about intimate stuff like that they couldn't truly comprehend or appreciate. But Francesca identified with my grief. Granted, she hadn't had a child herself that had died from SIDS, but her grievances were born about from her daily events, mirroring the issues that had diseased my own life, like a ravaging cancer that eats you from the inside out. Francesca was terrified of so much. She was afraid of walking on her own, in case she got attacked, being stranded in a forest, of spiders, of snakes, of roaches and rats, of being left alone, of being abandoned, of the dark, and the list goes on and on. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to say, what was Francesca not afraid of? Ironically, we ended up going to exactly the same counsellor, which was great. We were on similar antidepressant medications. As it seems, anxiety and depression are related. They need to be medicated with antidepressants. They're linked to fear-based issues and are influenced by low levels of feel-good chemicals in the brain, namely serotonin and dopamine. Within a week of consuming antidepressants, I was beginning to feel much more like my old self. It was like the feelings of wanting to be dead abandoned me. I began to discover some good things in my life again. My moods were more stabilised. My despair was cushioned so that the pain that had crippled my life for so long seemed to just blow away like the smoke from a chimney. It felt as if the weight of the world had finally been lifted off my shoulders. It was a huge release for me. Suffice to say, Francesca was doing exceedingly well, both with the antidepressants and her therapy. She'd been holding spiders and snakes in her hands. She'd sat in a dark room all on her own, without even needing a light. She'd been abandoned in the counsellor's office for over 30 minutes without batting an eyelid. She asked me if I would help her with her next fear. "Mr. Napier thinks I should go for a hike in the forest with you. He knows you and he thinks you should come with me. I think I can do this. Mr. Napier suggested I went to a forest in Blue Ridge. He's got the address here for us. It's about 93 miles from Atlanta and an hour-and-a-half drive away. Are you up for it?" "Of course," I say. "I think it would be great fun. But what do I do if you start to panic like you did when I first met you in the doctor's surgery?" "I don't think you've got anything to worry about there. Mr. Napier has armed me with different strategies and coping mechanisms, like breathing techniques, visualizations and so forth. He believes I can do this. I think I can too. I've already walked into the forest 12 times over in my mind through this technique, and I'm ready to do it in real life, without his intervention. He says it's important for me to do this exercise alone, with a supportive, encouraging friend like you." "Well, I'm certainly up for it," I say. "Brilliant. Well, then let's do it." The Blue Ridge is a segment of the Blue Ridge Mountains, here in the United States. It's made up of highly deformed rocks, comprised mainly of largely metamorphic rock. The mountains extend southwestward for 615 miles, from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, parts of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Mount Oglethorpe and Georgia. So there we were, driving on Interstate 575. Later we took a few back roads to a wooded area my friend's therapist had recommended, where a private landowner had permitted people with emotional issues to access the wooded area on his land as a form of natural therapy. It would seem this gentleman had been a patient of Mr. Napier himself, suffering from severe panic disorders, and had invited any of his patients the opportunity of exploring the woodland sanctuary on his private land, which he described as transfixing. "It's the least I can do," he told Mr. Napier.
You've helped me so much with my anxiety issues, and it's called giving back. I'd like to help some of your other patients with their anxiety issues, and I think walking in the woods is a wonderful way to treat oneself."
It made it all the more special. We knew no one else would be around on this private trail. We would be privy to enjoying this woodland sanctuary, all to ourselves. It was a spectacular spring day, and me and Francesca were wearing large floppy hats on our heads and sunglasses on our faces. The sunshine was quite bright for a spring morning, but not blinding or invasive, more like a warm, inviting, friendly hug. I glanced surreptitiously at Francesca to see how she was doing, but there was a large smile on her face, and it looked as if anxiety had not even entertained her thoughts for a brief second. I sighed with relief, hoping that her calm state of mind would persist, especially when we entered the woodland oasis. In the furthest distance, we saw the commanding, hazy blue silhouettes, or configurations if you like, of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the shadowy, rugged, billowing, voluptuous curves that audaciously plundered the skyline with a pompous, haughty pride that certainly besought your attention. These vainglorious mountains expect to be honoured, and I don't blame them, by a sense of wonder and nothing less. They know their worth, and they flaunt their majesty proudly under the vast blue canopy of the sky. It was a very inviting trail, I have to say, full of promise, which began with walking through a flowery meadow, where tall purple spiky flowers intrusively propelled their vertical shoots through the long grass, along with knapweed daisies, cat's ears, and other pretty woodland flowers of fetching vibrant colours that graciously and magnanimously lended their beauty to this spectacular landscape. There were jutting rocks that purged themselves through the ground, like sculptural artsy projections in a gallery of wild grasses. Finally we reached the fringe of the forest, which rises up a hill on a steep ascent. It's at this point that Francesca draws in a deep breath. "Right," she says, straightening up her back and mumbling to herself. "You know you can do this, Francesca. It's just trees, it's just birds, just a little walking, nothing to be frightened about." I'm wondering to myself if stories like Little Red Riding Hood and the Mean Fox have somehow impregnated her mind and given her a negative reaction to woodland areas. It would make sense, as some of our greatest impressions are formed subliminally in our early lives, sometimes with negative consequences. It's hard to fathom that anyone could be afraid of such beauty. The forest is full of spectacular, well-established oak trees, maples, dogwoods, tulips and hemlocks. Let's just say the trees seem to almost welcome our approach, rather like an audience appreciating the arrival of the actors as they make their appearance onto the stage, followed by a plethora of applause. There's a soft breeze blowing, and the boughs of the trees almost swing gently up and down, the leaves rustling on their bronzed extremities. I marvel at the height of these trees, and the vast girth and burliness of their powerful trunks that circumnavigate and wing their way up into the skies with an assertive determination and vigorous tenaciousness. It's so beautiful in the woods, I almost hold my breath. The woods are heavily shaded, furnished richly in a bedazzling viridescence from the ferns and plant shrubbery that weave their way audaciously over the dark earth, that is injected with a combination of steep rocks, gnarled roots that claw their way angrily through the ground, like the extensive tentacles of a giant squid. A graceful, elegant light dances through the branches of the trees, casting its sparkling beams onto the vegetation, making everything more alluring. But we watch our feet as we navigate our way through some of these obnoxious appendages that erupt through the earth like uncongenial landmines. We've been walking through the woods for some time, and I get the overwhelming sense that I'm being watched. I glance over at Francesca. She's trembling. "Oh, my God! I think I'm losing it. Just when I was doing so well. I don't know what's going on with me." She quickly grabs a brown paper bag from the knapsack that she's carrying. She sits down next to an oak tree on what looks like a large cluster of fungi that's attaching itself to the bottom of the tree. She begins to blow in and out of the brown paper bag. And then it happens. The next thing I know, a foreboding, terrifying-looking snake with a heavy tan brown body, hourglass crossbands down its length, and a triangular head with offensive-looking elliptical pupils that I now know is the poisonous copperhead, has lifted its head and is about to strike Francesca, as sitting down against the tree, had obviously imposed herself unwillingly on his territory, and he's threatened. All of a sudden, before the snake can actually lash out at Francesca and strike her with a big bite, a rock is flung at the snake, killing it instantly. Francesca's face pales. "Oh my God! This thing nearly bit me! It's a copperhead!" she says, stumbling to her feet, her terrified eyes glancing down upon the area where she'd been sitting only moments before. "Those snakes are so dangerous! But who killed it with this rock? It came flying out from those trees over there. It hit the snake precisely." Then we see her, the answer to Francesca's enigmatic question. At first I discern a dark, shadowy, misty-looking silhouette through the trees, with a huge humanoid-like appearance that rather reminds me of Gorillas in the Mist with Diane Fossey, when I used to watch those programmes years ago. But then the creature slides the foliage of leafy green boughs away, rather like a curtain, that clandestinely shielded her titanic form. And then we see her, in her lofty majesty. I realise we're staring at a female Bigfoot. I'm so stunned. I just stare at her in bewilderment, as if I'm doubting what my eyes are actually perceiving. This can't be real. There's no way this is real. The creature ignores our shocked reactions. She unhesitantly bounds towards the oak tree, before either of us can react, and the creature grabs 4 more copperheads, thrashing them against the tree so hard, killing them with an effortless ease. I realise that what I assumed was fungi cradling the bottom of the oak tree was a family of copperheads. It seems like Francesca had a narrow escape there. Obviously the Bigfoot does not like waste, for she flings the dead bodies over her shoulders. I imagine she'll be snacking on those snakes later. Both Francesca and I stare at the Bigfoot in abject disbelief, wondrous awe, and complete astonishment. It's like we've been flung into a fictitious world of make-believe fantasies and fairy tales. But we both know that this is not the case. The Bigfoot is real. My eyes hungrily devour every single detail of her, rather like a photograph that I never ever want to forget, and want to permanently entrench in my memory. I know I'm privy to seeing something others have longed to see and have never seen. The Bigfoot is tall. She's statuesque, imposing, powerful. She towers at about 8 foot tall. She's possibly 700 pounds. She's burly, robust, as tough as an oak tree. I discern her long, dark, flowing hair. It's tangled by a few burrs, leafy twigs, and Spanish moss that has weaved its way into the thick layers of her silky coat. She has small breasts. Her muscle definition and tension is so pronounced that I discern a grey skin rigidly set with muscles as prominent as the gnarled roots of the oak trees. The creature should terrify the bejesus out of the both of us, for if you were to see her close up and personal, let's just say she's daunting. But her demeanour, her human-like face, her gentle nature, her deep-set golden eyes, leaves all fear flying out of the window, like the smoke from a chimney. Instead, my entire being is expropriated by a latitudinous sense of stupendous reverence. Thank you, we say to the Bigfoot. Thank you for coming to our rescue. We really appreciate it. For a moment, the Bigfoot just stands there. She looks at us, studies us for a while, through her kind, beautiful, engaging, deep yellow eyes. She seems to focus on Francesca for a moment. I then sense there's a 2-way telepathic exchange going on between Francesca and the Bigfoot. And then, with what looks like 5 snakes thrust over her shoulder, she gives us a nod and just glides away. What did she say to you? She told me fear wasn't my friend, that I should never ever entertain her, that she's more deadly than the snake she just killed. Wow, that's incredible, I say. How could she possibly know you have so many fears? It seems like she gave you sound, very wise advice. But do you realise she rescued us from those copperheads? I think you sat down on its nest. To cut a long story short, I have to say while I believe Mr. Napier helped both me and Francesca with the issues in our lives, and to overcome our hang-ups, fears and grievances, it was certainly an encounter with a Bigfoot that changed Francesca's attitude towards everything, as now she no longer lives a life crippled by fear, And I am doing so much better these days. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.